Welcome to Protege, where we break down the invisible skills that actually accelerate your career. I'm Molly Jaggers, and today we're talking about the feedback gap, that space between what you're hearing and what you actually need to hear. Have you ever gotten feedback that felt good in the moment, but didn't actually help you get ahead? Your manager looked you in the eye and said, "You're doing great. Keep up the good work." And you walked out of that meeting feeling okay until promotions came out and you didn't get the role. So now, of course, you're replaying everything, trying to figure out why. What did they see in someone else that they didn't see in you? What were you missing? And if you're like a lot of women, you're running through every interaction, every project, every conversation, trying to find the gap. Was it that one meeting where I didn't speak up enough? Was it this project that went sideways? Did I not advocate for myself the right way? And I get it because I've been there. That mental spiral after being passed over is exhausting. And the worst part, you probably can't pinpoint anything specific because no one gave you anything specific to work with. Here's what I've learned: your performance wasn't the problem. You were delivering, that wasn't what held you back. Women consistently outperform in evaluations. And that's not my opinion. That's what research shows us. Higher performance ratings across the board, and yet 15 to 20% less likely to get that first promotion to manager, the one that actually puts you in a leadership seat. How is that possible? Because there's two distinct evaluations happening in every workplace. One is written on your performance review. The other one, the one that actually decides who gets promoted, is happening in conversations you're not a part of. It's called potential. And when it comes to being scored on potential, women are consistently rated about 8% lower, even with equal or better performance. Now, that might seem small, but potential ratings operate in narrow bands. It's often that fine line between ready now and needs development. And needs development doesn't move you forward. When research dug into why the promotion gap itself exists, that little 8% difference in potential ratings explained almost half of it. Half. So, all those extra hours, the exceeding expectations, the going above and beyond, it matters, but it's not enough because you're playing one game while they're scoring you on another. And that's just the potential piece. We're not even talking about things like forced ranking or budget constraints that are outside your control. So, today, we're going to learn the language of potential, what it actually means, how it's being evaluated, and most importantly, what to ask when your manager says you're doing great that will actually get you the feedback you need to close that gap. Early in my career, I was getting that feedback most women get: "You're doing great, keep it up." And I believed it. Then an opportunity came up to represent our company externally: conferences, industry events, building strategic partnerships, and I wanted it. And my director looked at me and said, "Sweetie, you aren't ready for that." And it absolutely floored me, not just because it came off condescending as hell, but because it created this cognitive dissonance to everything I'd been told up to that point and the narrative I had been telling myself, too. And I remember thinking, wait, how can I be doing great and also not ready to represent us? That disconnect is exactly what we're talking about today. So let's break this down. Why does this gap happen? And what can you actually do about it? I call this the hidden evaluation problem. There's two assessments happening simultaneously, and only one of them is visible to you. The first is performance, the second is potential, and they're measured completely differently. Performance is about what you deliver today. Potential is about what leaders believe you can grow into tomorrow. Women dominate performance ratings, but potential ratings, that's where the gap lives. Think about it. When they're deciding who to promote, they're not just asking who delivered this quarter. They're asking, who can I see running this team? Who can handle what's next? Who's ready for more? That's a potential question, not a performance question. A lot of companies use something called a 9-box grid. It plots performance on one axis and potential on the other. You can be a high performer and still land in the moderate potential box. Not because you're failing, but because potential is judged on different things: strategic thinking, decision making under ambiguity, influence beyond your role, leadership presence. And the problem is that most organizations never clearly explain how they define potential. So you keep doing more work, not realizing that's not what's being measured. As you move up, the balance shifts. At higher levels, what you can do matters more than what you have done. So you might be delivering more than anyone else on your team, but if they can't picture you at the next level, you're not getting there. Performance without potential makes you reliable, but not promotable. You get considered, but you don't get chosen. So, how do you know which kind of feedback you're getting? You have to learn to hear the difference. And I want you to really listen to this because once you hear it, you can't unhear it. Performance feedback sounds like, "You're doing great. Keep up the good work. You're such a team player. You're so reliable. We really appreciate everything you do." Feels good to hear, right? But notice what's missing. There's no direction. There's no, "Here's where you're going." It's all backward looking. And it's a pat on the head, not a push forward. Now, listen to potential feedback. "You haven't shown me you're ready yet. I need to see you thinking beyond your immediate tasks. I've noticed you tend to escalate cross functional issues to me. I'd love to see you working those out directly. You're great at execution. What I'm curious about is how you'd approach it if you were making the strategy calls." Hear the difference? One tells you what you've done, the other tells you what's missing. If you're only hearing the first kind, you're not getting potential feedback. You're getting performance validation, and those are two very different things. So, why does this happen? Why are women getting gold stars when what we actually need is a roadmap? Here's some research to dig into that. Stanford Business School found that when evaluation criteria are vague, and let's be honest, leadership potential is about as vague as it gets, managers default to stereotypes. They fill in the gaps with assumptions. And when it comes to women, one of those assumptions is that kindness matters more than clarity, that it's better to soften the message than risk seeming unsupportive. The result? Almost 6 in 10 women get vague praise. Only about 4 in 10 men do. And it gets worse. Men are twice as likely to get feedback tied to business outcomes with specific action steps. Things like, "Here's what you need to work on, here's how it connects to the results, and here's what success looks like." When women do get critical feedback, it's often personality based. "You came across as abrasive in that meeting. You were too aggressive. You need to be more likable." And that's not developmental, that's just frustrating. And here's the thing: managers aren't usually doing this on purpose. They think they're being supportive, they think they're being kind, they think "you're doing great" is encouraging. But encouragement without direction isn't development, it's a dead end. And it leaves you guessing about what's actually required to advance, while the person in the next office is getting a detailed blueprint. Here's what makes this even more frustrating. You might think, "Okay, I just need to prove myself. I'll work harder, deliver more, and eventually they'll see my potential." Yale research found that doesn't work the way you'd expect. Even when women prove themselves over time, when they consistently deliver results quarter after quarter, their potential ratings don't catch up. The perception of what you could do doesn't automatically update based on what you did do. Your past performance doesn't update their future expectations. So just work harder doesn't work because you're solving the wrong problem. You're trying to prove performance when what you need is to change their perception of your potential. So if vague praise isn't helping you, what questions should you actually be asking? Here's what I want you to do differently. Stop accepting "you're doing great" as the end of the conversation and start treating it as the beginning. I'm going to give you three questions here. These aren't just nice things to ask, they're diagnostic tools. One to identify the gap, one to surface how you're being perceived, and one to get specific when they're being vague. The answers tell you where you stand, and sometimes the inability to answer tells you even more. Here's the first one to directly ask about the gap. Thank you, I appreciate that. What would I need to demonstrate to be considered for this specific role or level? This question shifts the conversation from backward looking to forward looking. You're not asking them to evaluate what you did, you're asking them to tell you what's required for where you want to go. It forces your manager to name specific criteria, not vague, keep doing what you're doing, but actual concrete things they'd need to see. And here's the diagnostic part. If they can't give you specifics, that tells you something important. Either they haven't defined what ready looks like, or they have and they're not sharing it with you. So push for clarity here. If the criteria doesn't exist yet, help them build it. What would you need to see from me over the next 6 months? Either way, that's information you need. And again, a non answer is still an answer. The second question goes deeper. This one is about perception. If my name came up for this role, what do you think people would say about me? And what would need to change before you'd feel confident making the case? This question does two things. First, it surfaces how you're actually being perceived, not what you're delivering, but what narrative exists about you right now when you're not in the room. Second, it acknowledges reality. If you're having this conversation, your manager probably isn't ready to advocate for you yet. That's okay. What you need to know is what would change that? Most managers have never been asked this directly. And when they try to answer, they often realize they don't actually know enough about your work to tell a compelling story. That gap in their awareness, that's useful information. It tells you what's not visible, and visibility is something you can fix. And the third question is for when they're giving vague feedback by using concepts without getting specific. Something like, you need more executive presence. Okay, but what does that actually look like? These phrases mean nothing until they're grounded in specific moments. So you push for specifics. When you say I need more executive presence, can you give me an example of when I demonstrated it and when I didn't? If they can't give you an example, and sometimes they can't, ask again. What would it look like if I were doing it well? Help me understand what you're picturing. Make them paint the picture because executive presence in their head might be completely different from what you're imagining, and you can't close a gap you can't see. Here's the thing about these questions getting the answers is just step one. If they give you specific criteria, write it down. Literally, don't trust yourself to remember it perfectly. That list becomes your roadmap for the next quarter. Every project you take on, every meeting you're in, you're asking yourself, does this demonstrate what they said they needed to see? If they can't give you specifics, that's a signal. It might mean you need to have more frequent conversations so you're on their radar. It might mean you need to find other people who can speak to your potential. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. And if you get vague personality feedback, like you need to be more confident, you're too quiet in meetings, this is where question three becomes your shield. Ask for examples because sometimes that feedback says more about their biases than about your actual behavior. Remember that director I mentioned who gave me feedback that I wasn't ready for something? After the frustration passed, I realized she gave me a gift. Not the sweetie part, that was condescending, but the clarity. She told me something no one else had. So I got curious. What specifically was I missing? I started asking people in the roles that I wanted, what did you need to know? What should I learn? What would have better prepared you? I built a roadmap from their answers and I started filling in the gaps. And if you're listening as someone who develops talent, here's what I want you to hear. You probably think you're being kind when you give encouraging feedback. You're doing great, keep it up. It feels supportive. But kindness without clarity isn't kind, it's confusing. When someone tells you they want to grow into leadership, they're asking for a roadmap. You're doing great isn't a roadmap. Here's what I'd need to see from you to advocate for that promotion is. Clarity and kindness can coexist. In fact, clarity is kindness. The most supportive thing you can do for someone with ambition is tell them exactly what success looks like and help them identify where the gaps are. That's not harsh, that's leadership. And that's the kind of feedback that actually moves careers forward. It's what moved mine. Later that year, by the way, I got a new role at a new company doing exactly what I'd been told I wasn't ready for: building industry partnerships, representing our company at conferences, closing deals in the room. In that first year, $3 million in new partnerships, beat my targets by over a third. But here's what I'm most proud of: it wasn't just that role, it was the skills. I'd closed gaps I didn't even know existed until someone told me I wasn't ready, and I got curious enough to figure out exactly what that meant. And those skills opened doors I couldn't have imagined. Now, I want to address something because I know what some of you might be thinking. When you get feedback that stings, and you will, your first instinct might be to question whether it's fair. Is this bias? Is this because I'm a woman? Are they holding me to a different standard? And sometimes the answer is yes. Bias exists. Some of the research we talked about today proves it. Women do get different feedback. We do get rated lower on potential, even with equal performance. That's real. But here's what I've learned: you can acknowledge that bias exists and still focus on what you control. Both things can be true. So before you dismiss feedback as unfair, ask yourself, what haven't I shown yet? What gap can I close? Is there any kernel of truth here that I can use? Not because bias doesn't exist, it does. But spending your energy on what you can't control doesn't help you. Waiting for the system to be fair doesn't get you promoted. Playing the game as it exists now, while also working to change it, that's how you move forward. I'm not telling you to accept unfair treatment. I'm telling you to be strategic about where you put your energy. Get curious before you get defensive. Extract what's useful and then act on it. Clarity isn't always handed to you. Sometimes you have to go get it. Because not ready isn't a life sentence, it's a gap to close. Performance review season is either just behind you or right around the corner. Before that feedback fades, before you file it away and go back to business as usual, I want you to do something. Schedule 15 minutes with your manager, just 15 minutes, and ask one thing: what would I need to demonstrate to be considered for the next level? What are the top 2 or 3 things you'd need to see from me? Write down what they say, word for word if you can. And remember, that list becomes your filter for the next quarter. Every project, every meeting, every opportunity, you're asking yourself whether this demonstrates what they needed to see. If they give you specifics, that's your roadmap. You know exactly what to work on. If they can't give you specifics, that's data too. It means you need to have more of those conversations and also make sure you're finding other people who can speak to your potential. Either way, you've started a different conversation. You've shifted the narrative from receiving feedback to driving your own development. And look, I know asking these questions might feel uncomfortable because it's something new. You might worry about seeming too pushy or impatient or like you're not grateful for the positive feedback. But here's what you have to know: you're not being aggressive by asking for specific feedback. You're not being difficult by pushing back on vague praise. And you're not being ungrateful by wanting more than "you're doing great." You're being strategic. You're taking ownership of your career and you're doing what the people who got promoted actually do. And that, being strategic about your own advancement, is exactly what potential looks like. If this episode hit home, there's more where this came from. Every Thursday, I send out one tactical framework for navigating workplace dynamics, stuff that's too detailed for the podcast, with specific scripts and examples you can use that week. Link is in the show notes. And remember where we started? Your manager says you're doing great. And now you know that's not the end of the conversation. That's where the real conversation begins. You're not missing hard work. You're not missing talent. You might just be missing the language of potential. And now you have it. I'm Molly Jaggers, and this is Protege. See you next week.